The magician's most important invocation is that of his genius, daemon, true will, or Orgides. This operation is traditionally known as attaining the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. It is sometimes known as the magnum opus or great work. That is a quote from Peter J. Carroll's Liber Null, and I'm Angel Millar, author of the 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality and the Path of the Warrior Mystic. Today I'm going to speak about the genius in relation to the occult traditions of the last couple of centuries. Now, although it may not always be recognized, the occult has changed over the last 100 years, 300 years, the last 800 years, and is almost not really recognizable as one thing from another. And in some sense, we may use the term occult or now Western esotericism because we do not really have an esoteric tradition in the same way that Hinduism is associated with Tantra or Islam is associated with Sufism. Our esotericism tends to be a little more separate from the mainstream religion, which for the last 800 years, of course, has been Christianity. Certainly, if we look back at the medieval period, the aims of the occultists, who were very often Christian theologians or Christian abbots, their aim was to come closer to God, to come into communion or connection with God, to understand the divine plan, to understand how mundane reality was connected to or perhaps infused with a divine or sacred reality. Often, of course, this would relate to the nature of angels, the hierarchy of angels, how they interact with each other, how creation came about, made by God or through Hebrew letters, and so on. If we fast forward to the 18th century, of course, we find Freemasonry spreading across Europe, absorbing all of these different esoteric traditions such as alchemy, Hermeticism, and Rosicrucianism, and formatting them through particular initiation rituals. And this format of degrees, of initiations, of a hierarchy of degrees is then taken up into the occult world later on. And instead of individual intellectuals writing in Latin for other intellectuals on another part of the European continent, we have a degree system, not just in, for example, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but even in Wicca, which would tend to be regarded as very separate or different to Freemasonry, yet the influence there is pretty obvious when you look at the ritual and the structure. And looking at the 20th century, we can see that occultism or magic almost becomes a kind of positive thinking, new age type of tradition, at least at certain points or in certain types of manifestation or flavor. Israel Regarde's Foundations of Practical Magic, for example, is really a fusion of Hindu Tantra, Zen Buddhism, Kabbalah, the originally Jewish theosophical system, later adopted into Christian thought, and from there adopted into the broader occult world, now even into Wicca. A combination of those plus positive thinking, meditation, and a little bit of hypnosis. Very, very different from the grimoire magic of the medieval period, attempting to conjure up demons or to commune with spirits or angels, for example. Very different, almost not recognizable at all. Now, I would say that during the 19th century and at least the first half of the 20th century, maybe a little after that, one of the defining features of the movers and shakers of the occult world was some kind of communication with the genius or some kind of manifestation of the genius. If we look at the most influential members of the occult world from the late 1800s through World War II, we can see that, for example, Aleister Crowley was not only the most notorious and publicity-courting occultist of his day. He was also a boxer, a mountaineer, a poet, an author of novels, and a fine art painter who, when he lived in Germany, was very dedicated to fine art painting and seems to have had some success, if not considerable success, in that country, and was taken quite seriously as a painter. Again, we can think of Austin Osman Spare, who exhibited at the prestigious Royal Academy in London at the age of 15, was a war artist during World War I, and then spent the rest of his life painting and drawing these incredibly strange and proto-surreal images of atavisms and spirits and visions from his own mind, really not achieving any kind of financial success and living in poverty, but nevertheless dedicating himself to the genius that was within him. Of course, he is also known today as the creator of sigil magic, as used by chaos magic orders such as the Illuminates of Thanateros in the last quarter of the 20th century. And of course, it was really that movement that really revived his sigil magic for a wider audience. Today, I would say that the occult has very largely become a kind of substitute religion, and to a certain degree, I think that's okay. It's very difficult to live in a world without faith. Having grown up in England, a very, very secular country, when I lived there, it can be very bleak to be in a secular society where really there's no meaning beyond what job you get, what position you hold in society, how much money you do or do not make, perhaps the person you marry or are dating, all fairly normal concerns, but at the end of the day, perhaps rather trivial concerns that don't really infuse life with ultimate meaning or purpose, the way that some people need it or are driven to find meaning. And it can become quite bleak and grey and dull and oppressive. But with the occult becoming this kind of substitute religion, all sense of the genius has disappeared, except as a kind of a historical curiosity. People say that they are quote-unquote working with a particular deity, or they are performing rituals that they may have made up or inherited from somewhere or got from some book, and it provides a kind of spiritual security, perhaps. But there is very little attempt to dig down into the psyche to discover the genius that dwells in that dark place within. Recently, I was listening to an interview with Richard Gavin, author of The Benighted Path, as well as several books of horror fiction. And he said the following, quote, "I'm going to study this thing and commune with this thing or this spirit or this place as deeply as I can, and have this symbolic relationship where it will provide me with inspiration. And so for me, delving into the depths has always been the most important element of any of my endeavors, whether that's writing fiction or doing my own spiritual practice or writing a work of esotericism," unquote. Now, there are some key concepts there, the most important of which are undoubtedly inspiration and delving into the depths, or delving into the depths of the psyche to achieve inspiration, to achieve this communion with this genius that lies latent in our own psyche or our own being. Now, of course, in ancient Greece, the genius was referred to as the daemon, literally the little god that dwells within us, that is somehow connected to the gods outside of us, the gods that determine the reality that we live in, or if we want to put it in terms of Sanatana Dharma or quote-unquote Hinduism, it is Atman as related to Brahman, the soul related to deity or God. Well, I'm going to read an extract from an article by Kyla James, which you can find on the spiritualsurvival.com, and I'll put a link below. But he says, quote, Stella Adler, the great acting teacher, used to say, never psychoanalyze the artist. What she meant was, don't label him or her as an alcoholic, a narcissist, an obsessive, compulsive. The life of the artist, the genius, is the struggle to triumph over the confines and cruelty of society, and to do so at all costs. How can we judge the life of a sensitive genius like Tennessee Williams, Kurt Cobain, or Sarah Kane, the late English playwright, by saying that their excesses led them to their doom? Or how can we condemn the life of a brutal genius like Picasso, Wagner, or Crowley, when they fought to leave such great bodies of work? In Surviving Picasso, the Merchant Ivory film, Anthony Hopkins struts across the screen like Shaw's Superman, like Crowley's Man of Will. Beyond morality, Hopkins' Picasso is one with art, to do, to will, to paint, and to make love. Nietzsche said, whatever is done from love always occurs beyond good and evil. This is the driving force of the artist. And later on he goes on to say, quote, a genius is someone who succeeds in making contact with his or her higher self, higher genius or holy guardian angel, unquote. And of course, again, if we look back to the medieval occult world, we find the abbot, the theologian, the Christian occultist attempting to commune with angels or higher intelligences external to him, or to come into communion with God in some way. Later on, we find this idea of communing with the holy guardian angel, particularly associated today with Aleister Crowley, of course, because of his revelation that he received or alleged to have received from his holy guardian angel, Aiwass, who dictated this book to him, or allegedly dictated it to him. But in some sense, the genius may be the best term, better than daemon and better than holy guardian angel, because ultimately the genius is concerned with manifesting something, creating artwork, a painting, music, sculpture, whatever it may be. But it is not something that remains solely in the psyche, perhaps providing words of counsel or inspiration or intuition. It is something that is manifest on paper or in music and so on. Now, I said earlier that the Western esoteric tradition did not stand in relation to the main religion of the West in the same way that Tantra is related to Hinduism or Sufism to Islam, both of which are very much a part of those cultures, whereas of course the Western esoteric tradition has always been something much more hidden, obscure, portrayed as dark and even sinister by mainstream society, of course. But one of the fundamental characteristics of the individual within such traditions is a kind of contact with the genius within and a manifestation of that genius. And today, of course, there's very much a desire for systems of degrees, where we go through these degrees and reach enlightenment at the end, or have some kind of spiritual awakening at the end, or we can take a particular drug which will open the mind to unseen realities. We want a kind of path to getting there, and there's nothing wrong with that. And this, of course, what I'm about to say is undoubtedly overly simplistic, but in a certain sense, I think we can see this as an imposition of Eastern thought on the Western psyche, especially through the influence of Hinduism, Buddhism, Sufism, etc., through such figures as Aleister Crowley and through the 1960s hippie culture. And there's certainly much that is admirable and desirable in such cultures and worth studying earnestly on their own terms. But the Western psyche in relation to esotericism, in relation to the arts, to philosophy, and to self-development, even using that term rather broadly, has always been one of going out into the wilderness, into the depths of the psyche, into the unknown. It's in the West that we discover the subconscious with Jung and Freud, and before that, hypnotism, which was an influence on early psychoanalysis, of course, of going out into the wilderness for initiations in pre-monotheistic Europe, of going out into space, of going out into new realms of the arts, creating new genres and aesthetics of arts and so on. The Western psyche, in relation to these things, there's always an attempt to tap the unknown, to experience the unknown, and to bring forth something new, something of the genius. Well, I'm going to be speaking more about the genius, initiation, self-development, spirituality, the esoteric, the mysterious even. Until next time, you can check out my website, angelmillar.com, angelmillar.com, or thespiritualsurvival.com, links below. And until next time, thanks very much.